You ready? The Subcommittee on Information Technology and the Subcommittee on Government Operations will come to order. Without objection, the presiding member is authorized to declare recess at any time. Good morning. Today's hearing is part of this committee's continuing oversight of federal IT. This began with GAO's designation of information technology as high risk back in February 2015, and it's been a priority of ours ever since. The scorecard has evolved each iteration in response to GAO recommendations and also stakeholder feedback. At the last FITARA hearing, we spoke about expanding the scorecard to create a digital hygiene score for each agency. To move toward this goal, Scorecard 6.0, the one we're talking about today, adds two new graded categories. One category grades agencies' implementation of the MGT Act, Modernizing Government Technology Act. The second category, in preview mode only, is a cybersecurity metric designed to measure agencies' information security practices. Since the last scorecard, 5 agencies' grades increased, 8 agencies' grades stayed the same, and 11 decreased. I want to note that we assign these grades not to shame agencies, but rather to incentivize certain behaviors that will save money and increase security. One area where we've increased pressure is the continued lack of a direct reporting structure from the CIO to the agency head. 3 agencies have reorganized to give the CIO direct access since our last scorecard. To incentivize the remaining 9 agencies to change their reporting structures, we reduced their grades on Scorecard 6.0 by an entire letter grade. If every agency had a direct reporting structure, only 2 grades would have decreased on this scorecard. I urge those 9 agencies that have still not changed their reporting structures to comply with Executive Order 13833 and adjust their reporting structures without delays. And I will add that we haven't heard any reason why this shouldn't, any reasonable reason why this shouldn't be changed immediately. Today's hearing features 2 panels with officials from the Department of Agriculture, which received a D-, and the Department of Defense, which received another F+. F+ is kind of an interesting.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Mr. Chairman. What was that again?
Yeah. Better than average failure, yes. USDA is one of the lighthouse agencies intended to lead the government in IT modernization. I want to hear how the agency plans to address stagnation in its FITARA scorecard grades and fix the organizational weaknesses in its IT practices so that it can better be a leader for other agencies. DoD continues to be the only agency with an F on the scorecard. DoD's failing score is, in part, due to the lack of transparency it provides into the majority of its IT spend. I hope to hear how DoD plans to increase transparency in the spending and investment decisions so that we can ensure the agency is responsibly spending the billions in taxpayer dollars we appropriate each and every year. As always, I'm honored to explore these issues in a bipartisan fashion with my friend and the ranking member of this subcommittee, the Honorable Robin Kelly from the great state of Illinois, as well as Chairman Meadows and Ranking Member Connolly from the Commonwealth of Virginia. I want to thank my distinguished colleagues and the witnesses for participating today. And now, without any further ado, the woman, the myth, and legend, Ms. Kelly, the ranking member. You're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before starting today's hearing, I do want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Meadows, and Ranking Member Connolly for your cooperation and leadership as our subcommittees continue to work together to oversee federal IT systems. It's been an honor and a privilege to work with each of you in this important area. Improving the capabilities of the federal government's IT systems is critical to our country's national security. A key part of that effort is the ongoing oversight our subcommittees have been conducting to hold agencies accountable for implementing the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act. Crucial to this oversight has been the scorecard that our subcommittees develop for grading agency progress and meeting the FITARA requirements. Today, our subcommittee has released the 6th version of the scorecard. The new scorecard has some notable changes since the last one we released. First, this scorecard adds a new category for grading agency performance and fulfilling the recently enacted enacted Modernizing Government Technology Act. The MGT Act gives agencies the authority to establish working capital funds that can be used to modernize outdated legacy IT systems and enhance cybersecurity. The act was first introduced by none other than Chairman Hurd, and I was proud to be an original co-sponsor of this landmark legislation along with Chairman Meadows and Ranking Member Connolly. Last week, President Trump issued an executive order directing that agency heads take action to ensure that the CEO of the covered agency reports directly to the agency head. The new scorecard also previews a new area that relates to federal cybersecurity and will grade agencies on their progress in improving their information security programs. Recent data breaches like the September 2017 Equifax breach, in which hackers gained access to information over 145 million Americans, highlights the need to strengthen information security in both the government and private sectors. Today's scorecard shows that while some agencies have made progress, others have hit roadblocks in meeting the requirements of FITARA. For example, while some agencies like the National Science Foundation improved, going from a C- to a B+, others, as you've heard, like the Department of Defense, have fallen behind, going from a D in 2015 to an F today. This most recent scorecard performance has me concerned. 14 agencies received failing grades in their management of software licenses. That represents the loss of an important opportunity to save taxpayer funds. According to GAO, by improving in this area, agencies have the potential to achieve hundreds of millions of dollars in government-wide savings. The scorecard also demonstrates that several agencies are still failing to consolidate and reduce their number of federal data centers. For example, since June 2017, DOD has scored an F in meeting the metrics that were established by the Office of Management and Budget for consolidating and optimizing data centers. I look forward to hearing from today's agencies on the challenges they face in FITARA implementation and how Congress can be more helpful. Last year, the federal government spent almost $95 million on its IT systems. FITARA and by extension the MGT Act are critical to ensuring that agencies are making the necessary IT investments to transition to more modern, efficient, and secure technologies. The scored metrics provide an important measurement for assessing agency progress in achieving this goal. I, too, want to thank the witnesses for testifying today. Your background and expertise will be helpful to us as we examine ways to further strengthen the federal government's capabilities in the area of IT acquisitions and operations. And again, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Now it's a pleasure to recognize the distinguished gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Hurd, Ms. Kelly, and Mr. Meadows. The four of us have formed a bipartisan team, and we're going to see this implementation of FITARA through on a bipartisan basis. And I think it's a great model for the United States Congress. I wish we could replicate it in so many other areas. But thank you for your leadership and cooperation. A lot of changes have occurred since our last scorecard hearing in November. We're on this, the sixth scorecard, we're emphasizing whether agency chief information officers are reporting to the agency's head or deputy, and whether agencies have a plan to set up a working capital fund pursuant to the MGT Act. It was signed into law at the end of last year. Working together on a bipartisan basis and with the Government Accountability Office, and I particularly cite Mr. Powner and his team for enormous cooperation and great, wonderful work. I believe the changes to the FITARA scorecard continue to measure accurately each agency's ability to manage the IT it has and the IT it seeks to acquire. As GAO will testify a little bit later, if all agencies do the basic tasks of, 1, ensuring that their CIO reports to the head of the agency as outlined in FITARA, 2, establishes a working capital fund pursuant to the MGT Act, and 3, creates a software license inventory as required by the Megabyte Act, the grades for today's hearings would change. There'd be 5 A's, 14 B's, 5 C's, and no D's and no F's. We've identified the low-hanging fruit, which would improve grades across the table. These 3 simple steps are already laid in statute, and every agency should be adopting the reforms. While most agencies have made progress on the existing FITARA metrics, the addition of MGT implementation and the decision to lower a full letter grade for those agencies in which the CIO did not report to the agency head or deputy resulted in a number of lower grades from the last scorecard. With the changes in methodology, only 5 agencies increased their letter grade, while 8 remained the same, and 11 received lower grades. Unfortunately, no agencies received an A grade on this scorecard, and for the 3rd scorecard in a row, as my 2 colleagues have already indicated, the Department of Defense once again receives an F+. Despite the lower grades, it's my hope that agencies can and will continue to improve their FITARA scorecard grades, especially with a new push from the White House in the innovation agenda led by Chris Liddell and Jared Kushner. Since FITARA was signed into law more than 3 years ago, this committee has stressed the importance of agency CIOs reporting to the head or deputy of the agency. Though not required by the FITARA legislation, we believe that CIOs could most effectively manage their IT projects when they speak to the agency head or deputy without having to maneuver through many additional layers of an organizational chart. In this scorecard, 9 agencies had their grades lowered because their CIO does not report to the head of the agency. On the plus side, I'm pleased that 3 agencies, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the National Science Foundation, and the Small Business Administration, have changed their CIO reporting structure for the better since the last hearing we had in November. I hope that with the issuance of the recent executive order on CIOs, which requires agencies, by the way, to make this simple organizational change, all agencies will now move quickly and make the necessary change so their CIOs can report to the head of the agency. One component that's been included in each of the last 6 iterations of the scorecard is the measure of agency progress toward consolidating and optimizing data centers. For this reason, I'm particularly disappointed there's been limited progress on this front, especially because of the savings that could be gained from improving in this area. In fact, this is one of the reasons, working with Mr. Penner and my colleagues, that we had the FITARA Extension Act, which was signed into law by President Trump, to make sure that we move the sunset provision, primarily to make sure that people can't wait out the clock with respect to this consolidation, which we think is very important. Compared to last November, only 5 agencies improved their scores on data center optimization, with the National Science Foundation joining HUD, GSA, and the Department of Education in receiving an A grade on this metric. On the other end of the spectrum, 5 agencies, including the Department of Defense again, received an F on this metric. Data center consolidation and optimization is important because agencies can here achieve real cost savings and reduce their environmental input and be better positioned to migrate to the cloud for better IT performance and security. In fiscal years 2016 and 2017, agencies reported a savings of $1.04 billion through their data center consolidation and optimization effort, with an additional $720 million in planned savings through the end of this year. Still, this amount is $978 million short of the goals set by the Office of Management and Budget. I urge agencies to continue to make progress in this area in order to reach OMB's goal of a savings of $2.7 billion by the end of fiscal year 2018. One of our witnesses here this morning is the Department of Defense. Received an F+ grade in the last 3 FITARA scorecards. The Department received an F on all of the scorecards metrics except the portfolio stat, where it received a D. I'm particularly concerned that the Department consistently does not employ incremental development in software projects and other IT investments. The use of incremental development reduces risks, increases the likelihood that each project will achieve its cost, schedule, and performance goals, and allows agencies to terminate a poorly performing investment with fewer sunk costs. However, of the Department's 26 projects listed, it's only planning to deliver functionality incrementally in 2 of them. On data center consolidation and optimization, the Department of Defense has reported that it owns and operates 3,623 tiered and non-tiered data centers, and through August 2017 has only closed 834 of them. The Department has reported that it plans to close an additional 1,122 by the end of this fiscal year, and I certainly hope they achieve that goal. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today. Now that Congress has authorized agencies to establish working capital funds to reinvest savings to modernize technology, we must ensure that those agencies are using IT acquisition best practices to avoid the problems that have plagued IT spending in the past. I look forward to the testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Now, let's get to why we're here, our witnesses. We have Mr. David Powner, Director of IT Management Issues at the Government Accountability Office. I think he holds the record for the number of times testifying before this committee. And we have three folks from the Department of Agriculture, Mr. Gary Washington, the CIO, Ms. Lynn Money, who is the CFO, and Mr. Donald Bice, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Administration. I appreciate y'all all being here. And pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before you testify, so please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. You can be seated. And in order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement has been made part of the record. As a reminder, the clock in front of you shows the time remaining during your opening statement. It'll turn yellow when you have 30 seconds left, and when it turns red, please wrap up. Also, remember to press the button to turn on your microphone before speaking. Mr. Powner, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Hurd, Ranking Members Kelly, Connolly, and members of the subcommittees, I would like to thank you and your staff for your continued oversight on IT management with this 6th set of grades. Your persistent and thorough oversight has made a difference in managing federal IT. Here are some of the key highlights on progress. On incremental development, when you held your first scorecard hearing in November 2015, 58% of the government's software development projects were planning to use a 6-month incremental approach. Now this percentage is up to 87%, and 19 of the 24 agencies receive an A or a B on the scorecard. Regarding data centers, collectively, we have closed about 7,000 centers and saved nearly $4 billion. With software licensing, when you previewed this a year ago, only 3 agencies had an inventory, now 10 do. But more importantly is the cost savings associated with this area. Last scorecard, we only saw about $50 million in savings from this initiative. This year alone, we expect $340 million government-wide from consolidating these licenses. That's 3.5 times the Central Technology Modernization Fund. And we also have had 4 agencies change their reporting structure, where they now report to the agency head. This progress would not have happened to this extent without your scorecard and oversight. There are 2 significant changes to Scorecard 6.0. One, there is a 6th area to grade with the MGT Act and the establishment of working capital funds. The bottom line here is not enough agencies are committing to establishing these working capital funds, although there does seem to be a solid commitment from DHS, Labor, and SBA. Establishing these funds are critical so that savings from software license, data center optimization, and portfolio stat efforts can be reinvested in agency IT modernization priorities. It is important to note that these 3 areas on your scorecard have the potential to each result in additional savings that are greater than the $100 million Technology Modernization Fund. The second change is a greater weighting to the CIO reporting category. Previously, agencies received a plus or a minus whether they reported appropriately. As my written statement highlights, CIOs have reported to us that this reporting structure is critical to carrying out their responsibilities. This reporting matters. It gives CIOs a real seat at the management table, and it will help to attract more qualified individuals to these positions over time. This reporting was also reinforced last week in the President's executive order on enhancing agency CIOs. The 9 agencies that did not report appropriately had their grades lowered a full letter grade. In addition, the scorecard previews a cyber grade that is based on 50% based on an annual IG assessment and 50% on a self-assessment of how agencies stack up against 10 cyber metrics reported quarterly to OMB. These metrics include intrusion detection and authentication associated with high-impact systems. With the MGT and CIO reporting changes, we saw 5 agency grades go up: HHS, Energy, Transportation, Labor, and NSF. 8 agencies didn't change while 11 went down. As Ranking Member Connolly stated, there would be major improvements to these grades if agencies simply did 3 things. 1, report to the agency head. 2, establish a working capital fund. And 3, have a complete software license inventory. The grades from 3 Bs, 12 Cs, and 8 Ds and 1 F would change to 5 As, 14 Bs, and 5 Cs, we would not have a single D or an F. These 3 actions and the associated higher grades are doable by the next scorecard. Turning to the Department of Agriculture. Agriculture plans to spend over $2 billion on IT this year. 83% of this is for operational systems. They have received a C since the second scorecard and would have had another C, but because their CIO doesn't report to the agency head, their grade was lowered to a D. Solidifying this reporting is important since the average CIO tenure at agriculture is only 1.8 years. They have had 9 CIOs since 2004 and 6 since 2012. Positive areas for agriculture: 80% of their software development projects use an incremental approach. They have closed over 2,000 non-tiered or smaller data centers and 20 large data centers and have received an A in the software license area. The savings in both the data center and portfolio stat areas are low compared to other agencies their size and is the main reason for low grades in these areas. Regarding the cybersecurity area, the IG assessment is a 2 out of 5 in each of the 5 NIST framework areas, and they self-report meeting 5 of the 10 OMB cyber metrics. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my comments on the Department of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Powner. Now I think there's going to be one statement for all of USDA and Mr. Bice, I was told, or Mr. Washington's delivering that. Mr. Washington, you're now recognized for 5 minutes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Hurd, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Kelly, and Ranking Member Connolly, and the members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to appear before you today to share the United States Department of Agriculture's progress on the implementation of the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act. We would also like to thank you for your continued commitment to improve information technology management across the federal government. The United States Department of Agriculture touches the lives of every American through its mission to provide leadership on agriculture, food, natural resources, rural infrastructure, nutrition, and related issues through fact-based, data-driven, and customer-focused decisions. To successfully accomplish this mission, the Department operates more than 300 programs through an extensive network of federal, state, and local cooperators. Secretary Perdue and Deputy Secretary Sinsky committed to creating a new operating model for information technology at USDA. We announced in December 2017 that USDA is implementing 4 key IT modernization strategies that are consistent with the FITARA goals: strengthen strategic IT governance, consolidate end-user services and data centers, enable a strategic approach to data management, and improve the USDA customer experience. USDA teamed with the White House Office of American Innovation and the General Services Administration Centers of Excellence to accelerate execution of these activities. In 2015, at the inception of FITARA, USDA assumed a leading position with an A on our Common Baseline Plan. Since 2015, USDA continues to move forward to meet the spirit of FITARA by reducing the number of CIOs across the department, the only CFO Act agency that implemented the IT management maturity model, and one of 6 agencies to receive an A on the megabyte portion of the scorecard. USDA has consistently proved itself as a leader in embracing FITARA. We continue to implement FITARA across USDA and definitely integrate it into our daily processes and IT modernization activities. To improve leadership alignment and the efficiency of operations across USDA's information technology activities, the department decreased the number of positions with the title Chief Information Officer from 22 to a single USDA CIO. An assistant CIO responsible for IT activities in each mission area, rural development, and departmental administration have been designated in permanent or an acting capacity for a total of 9 assistant CIOs within USDA. Standard performance elements for evaluation of assistant CIOs are created under my direction at USDA. In addition, the department rechartered the Executive Information Technology Investment Review Board to focus its efforts on the review of strategic IT investment rather than transactional decisions. The USDA integrated the IT governance framework process and acquisitions approval requests as the foundation for the USDA's FITARA Common Baseline Plan. Implementation of the USDA governance framework enabled the department to take an enterprise approach to IT and improve the quality of project planning and execution, reducing overall project risk. As a CIO, I actively engage with all key stakeholders through IT governance and investment management processes. For example, I hold regularly monthly engagements with program, project, and investment managers and agency leadership to evaluate and discuss the portfolio health of their investments. USDA supports the Data Center Optimization Initiative as part of the USDA's new IT operating model to consolidate IT infrastructure services under the management of the CIO. The department set a goal of reducing its data center footprint and movement to the cloud from a baseline of 39 tiered data centers to 2 enterprise data centers by the close of fiscal year 2019. To date, in 2018, USDA has closed 18 data centers. Overall, USDA has closed 2,100 data centers through DCOI and the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative. USDA's cost avoidance and savings from the DCIO data center consolidation activities for fiscal year 18 of $4.68 million. In fiscal year 19, USDA anticipates a $10 million savings resulting from rate reductions for all department-level hosting shared services offerings. Finally, USDA commits to using effective category management to leverage USDA's buying power and to reduce overall costs. We are currently consolidating end-user support services from 26 agencies and offices across the department into a single support organization within OCIO. We are also consolidated 74,000 copies of Adobe Acrobat through an enterprise license savings of $9.2 million. IT modernization and implementation of FITARA at USDA is a part of a purposeful strategy to improve the return on investment that IT spending creates through business outcomes for the department's customers. Thank you for your thoughtful approach and support of this important legislation that is having a positive impact on USDA's ability to rapidly implement a comprehensive IT modernization strategy and operating model. I look forward to your questions and to continue to work with you to further improve IT implementation at USDA and across the federal government.
I've always wanted to know why y'all were designated the a lighthouse agency, but I think you explained some of the reasons why. So thank you, Mr. Washington. Ms. Kelly, you're now recognized for the first round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The committee's scorecard makes clear that while some agencies have made progress, others continue to struggle in their implementation of FITARA. For example, the new scorecard shows that the overall letter grades for 11 agencies actually went down, A grades stayed the same, and only 5 agencies increased. Mr. Powner, you talked about 3 action areas that if the agencies followed their scorecards would increase. In your assessment, what accounts for the challenges agencies appear to be facing when it comes to improving their scores?
So there's many things on this scorecard, but those 3 basic things are just the way we've always done things at agencies. Some CIOs are buried in the agencies. We need to elevate them. This working capital opportunity to reinvest savings is a great idea, and everyone should have a good inventory, whether it's software licenses or anything else. So those 3 things are really basic steps, and if we did that, even DOD would get a C.
Do you think it's more resistance from the agencies? That's what's stopping them from implementing these 3 things, just like the direct reporting. Can you explain how that can help improve the agency and save money?
Well, I think when you, especially in the large federated agencies, if you have support from the top with the direct reporting, it allows you to dip into the component agencies and really drive change. I think some of the federated agencies, they're so set in their ways and have always done things a certain way, they don't get the direction from the top, and that's why there's such a great opportunity for the portfolio stat savings, for data center consolidation. And we see progress. I mean, I think the idea of Mr. Washington talked about going down to 2-tiered data centers, that's great. I mean, we need to hear more of that across the government.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bice, according to the USDA's website, its CIO currently reports to the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Administration and not the Secretary or the Deputy. As you've heard, we talked about the President issued this executive order. What steps are you taking to restructure the reporting relationship so that the CIO reports directly to Secretary Perdue?
Thank you for the question. So I'd start off by saying that Secretary Perdue, even though he was one of the last secretaries to get confirmed, immediately started making reorganization and reforms within the department. He was confirmed in April 2017, and by May 2017, he had already announced his first reorganization. So we have the executive order that just came out. We've got the Clean Air Cohen Act. We've got the intention of FITARA. So we were going to look at all of those, and we will ensure that we are complying with the law. But I will say that under the reporting structures that we have, Mr. Washington, though he's been the acting since September 2017 CIO and the permanent CIO since February 2018, has done incredible things, as you heard in his statement. So I think we've got the support from the Secretary. We've got the right person as our CIO. So that's part of the reason we're the lighthouse agency, and it's part of the reason we've had such success so far. But we're committed to make sure that the CIO has all the authorities that the CIO needs to modernize IT in the Department of Agriculture.
So I'm hoping the next time we look at the scorecard, your score goes up because things have changed in that.
Would my colleague yield just for a second?
Of course.
Mr. Bice, I'm not sure you answered Ms. Kelly entirely correctly. There's now an executive order directing you to do that. So it's not a matter of choice anymore.
Correct. Right now, our delegated authorities, 7 CFR 2.89, actually provide to the CIO. The CIO reports directly to the Secretary of Agriculture on all information technology matters. What we need to do is probably change the org chart to match the delegation. So I agree that we will have no choice but to comply with the law and with the executive orders. I was just merely stating that we need to take a look at the latest that have come out to make sure that we are complying.
Thank you. Ms. Mone, as the acting chief financial officer, can you explain briefly from a budgetary standpoint what financial challenges, if any, does the department face in improving the management of its IT operations?
Thank you for your question. So,
and where do you think additional funding is needed?
well, we actually already have a working capital fund that's been in existence actually since 1943, and we have been working diligently through that mechanism to be able to centralize services and achieve those economies of scales across the department. We were actually excited about the MGT Act being passed because we believe it does afford us more opportunities to be able to carry out those IT modernization efforts that we want to do. So in terms of challenges, for the most part, when we use the working capital fund, it does give us that extra leverage because now we have no year type authority, which allows us to, again, most IT projects are not carried out in one single year. It does cross years. So again, having the MGT and potentially getting money from the TMF fund will give us that extra leverage that we need to be able to carry out those projects.
Can I ask one more question? And Mr. Washington, in what ways can Congress help you in your implementation efforts?
I believe currently that the CIO has all the authorities and the vehicles in place right now to continue down the modernization path that it's taken. We have new leadership at USDA. The CIO and the CFO have a tremendous working relationship. We have a great relationship with the Office of American Innovation. So I think currently, if we're judged on our progress towards our modernization goals, I think we have everything that we need at this time.
Okay. We expect your score to go up. Thank you.
Yes.
I yield back.
Now, I'd like to recognize the distinguished and knowledgeable gentleman from Montana, Mr. Gianforte, for your round of questioning.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking members. FITARA requires that agencies work with OMB to review all agency IT investments and, among other things, to increase efficiency and identify potential waste. I know you've done that. Because this review must be standardized, OMB launched the Portfolio Stat Initiative. which requires agencies to conduct annual reviews of their IT investments. So my questions initially are for Mr. Washington. Could you walk us through your agency's portfolio review, and what were some of the opportunities you identified that could result in greater cost savings or efficiencies?
So we had a portfolio review with OMB in the month of March. We've identified a great number of areas where we could modernize potential cost savings, such as data center consolidation, what we're doing with category management and enhancing those activities, working with the CFO to make sure that we leverage shared services across the department and across the federal government. We're also using our cybersecurity improvements to ensure that we drive down costs and eliminate duplicities as well.
Could you share a little more details on some of those initiatives and what you're doing to implement them, and just share with us a little bit the size of the prize? What can we expect as we implement these efficiency gains that you've identified?
Sure. So the relationship with the Office of American Innovation, we have a framework for modernization, and it's not just about IT modernization. It's about reducing our cybersecurity, improving our cybersecurity posture at USDA. So over a 3-year period, we plan to consolidate our data centers and have 2 enterprise tiered data centers and give people the option to move to commercial cloud. We are working with our citizens and customers and customer experience to ensure that we not only modernize our systems, but we give our customers, our farmers, ranchers, scientists, the experience that they deserve with the USDA. We're improving also, we're modernizing our networks from 17 to 4, which is another goal in 2020 as well.
Okay, and so you mentioned commercial cloud. If you had to score yourself, what percentage of IT systems at USDA are on a commercial cloud today?
Currently, between 5 to 10% of the systems in USDA are in commercial cloud. However, we have 40% of our systems that are cloud ready, and before 2020, we plan to significantly increase that number.
Okay, and so you have a goal to drive to the
Yes.
cloud with.
Yes, sir, we do.
In your portfolio review, did you find any duplication or waste, and how do you plan to reduce that?
We found duplication and waste. How we plan to eliminate that is we have an executive review board where we brief our undersecretaries on enterprise activities. We plan to work with our agencies to ensure that they are a part of the process, and it's a collaborative remediation to these issues, and work with our component CIOs and our CFO community to ensure that we're tracking our progress towards meeting our goals.
I applaud you for moving to more of a strategic approach to IT and away from transactional. You mentioned that earlier in your testimony. As you look out to the future, what does the optimized IT portfolio look like at USDA, let's say 5 years from now?
Well, I think the optimized IT portfolio in USDA, we will be more accurately measuring what the new investments that we've made in terms of how we service our citizens. It would be a business value approach and a business approach to delivering IT services. We will hopefully decrease the footprint and save the amount of money that we need to in IT and deliver more value.
Okay, and we've been talking quite a bit about reporting structure here today. I'm curious, the findings from the review of the systems, how did you personally communicate that to the Secretary?
Excuse me, sir?
The findings from the portfolio review, how was that communicated to the Secretary?
Well, I communicate that to the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Administration and the Deputy Secretary, and the Deputy Secretary communicates that to the Secretary.
Okay, so have you had a chance to sit down with the Secretary to go through your IT recommendations?
I have not had a chance of yet, but I do have opportunities to speak with the Secretary about improvements that we're making in IT.
Okay, and I think I've used up my time, so I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Connolly, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the panel. Mr. Powner, I believe you talked about a fair amount of turnover in terms of CIOs at USDA. if I did my math right, in the last 6 years, it's one a year on average. Is that correct?
Correct.
Why? Why such high turnover?
I don't know all the reasons for the high turnover, but I think it reinforces why you want that direct reporting to the top, because I agree, Mr. Washington has a lot of respect internally, but if he walks out the door tomorrow, will someone come in, have that respect immediately and access to the top? I don't think that necessarily that's the case.
Mr. Washington, how long have you been in your job?
So I've been in my job. Excuse me. I've been in my job in an acting capacity since September 6th. I became permanent on February the 4th.
Just since this February, then?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bice, why the high turnover in CIOs? I can tell you in the private sector, that would be a huge issue for CEO.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, I will say that Gary and I both became actings in September 2017 and both became permanent in February 2018. And both Gary and I have every intention to follow through on IT modernization and making the Secretary and the
I know, but tell us why you've had such high turnover.
Well, some of it might be, you know, we have both career and political CIOs in the past. We've had both. The last CIO, we are all senior executives. I'm a career federal employee, almost 30 years in the federal government, and we all are available to be moved to any additional position based on the needs of the department. So partly it's based on the sort of reality of our positions.
Well, the good thing is you've moved from 22 people with the title to 1. That's good. The turnover is not so good, and I think it is a management issue that has to be looked at. Telework. So when I went to the White House a few weeks ago with Mr. Hurd to meet with Mr. Kushner and Mr. Liddell to talk about the innovation agenda, your agency was the one that they've decided will be sort of the pilot project because, in part, Secretary Perdue offered it up, and that's fine. But Secretary Perdue reportedly cut back on telework in USDA because when he was looking for somebody, when he was making the rounds, that somebody happened to be working remotely that day on a telework program, and he reacted negatively to that. Either Mr. Washington or Mr. Bice, do you want to comment on that? Because that seems to be a step backward. From our point of view, telework is a very important key element in the deployment of the IT we're talking about here.
I'll handle that question. So not aware of that particular incident that you're referring.
It was in the press.
I'm not personally aware of that particular incident you're referring to, but I will say that you are correct that the Secretary made a determination to change the assumptions behind the telework policies in the Secretary's parlance to ensure that supervisors were given the appropriate authority to manage to ensure the efficiency of the service was continued. So there was a policy change. Right now the policy is that people can telework up to 1 day a week. And there is also the ability, if there is a reasonable accommodation need, that did not change. If you have a reasonable accommodation need, you could telework more than that policy. In addition, if there are space limitations, we have several agencies that assumed their space based on the ability to telework. That did not change. You still, as an agency head, can change and allow telework beyond the 1 day a week.
Okay. Well, I hope you'll take the word back. I mentioned it at the White House that I thought it was a retrograde move. We think telework is very important, and we don't want to see any backsliding. And we've seen a lot of progress in USDA particularly. And so we don't want to lose that. And the fact that maybe there was a negative experience by the Secretary ought not to be a reason for reversing or changing substantially the telework policy. And what we hope we don't get into, well, is setting legislative metrics for you. So we hope the cooperative spirit will continue. If there's another round, I want to get into data centers because I didn't quite follow your numbers, Mr. Washington. If I heard you correctly, you said you're going to go from 39 to 2 by FY 2019. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Blum, you're now recognized for your round of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Hurd. Thank you for our panelists to be here. Good to see you again, Mr. Powner. Most of my questions, I think, are for you. I come from the private sector, so this government stuff here is new to me. And it's hard for me, also from the high-tech industry, so it's hard for me to understand. In a hearing last year in oversight, we uncovered that Social Security Administration spent $350 million of taxpayers' money on a project that was discontinued. I asked, did Lockheed Martin get paid? Yes. Did anybody lose their job? No. Okay, not like the private sector. Now, in January, report comes out, Veterans Affairs has spent over $2 billion. $2 billion of taxpayer money on projects that were stopped or were failed. Mr. Powner, how does this happen? Just explain this to me in layman's terms so the people in my district in Iowa can understand this. How does this happen?
When you look at the failures across the government, we've looked at most of them. There's a lack of governance and accountability. I can't tell you how many projects, to really the heart and soul, what you guys are trying to do here with CIO authorities, the CIO is not involved with the project. We just reported on an electronic health record failure at the Coast Guard. There was no CIO involvement. There was no one even had any IT background. And the issue here is about the authorities and the span that the CIO has to govern over all IT at the departments and agencies. We need to know where the money's being spent so that we can have the right people involved with the right governance to effectively manage risk. And that doesn't always occur. I'm not saying it's right, because we think it's that's the wrong way to approach it, but that's the reality of what we see with a lot of these failures.
So you're telling me the CIO, Chief Information Officer of an agency like Mr. Washington, in these failures, they weren't involved in these billion-dollar IT projects? That's incomprehensible.
Yes, absolutely, that is the case, that they're not involved.
Is that ending? Has that ended? That can't continue.
Well, I think it's getting a little, I mean, the whole part of FITARA, too, is right to capture all of our spend. We have an initiative with the President's management agenda called the Technology Business Model, where we're going to capture more IT spend. It's not because we're finding every penny that goes to IT. It's because we get the right people engaged with the technology part of things. That's what's really important, that you get the right governance over the technology.
My colleague, Mr. Connolly, asked a great question about the CIO turnover. This would be for anybody in the panel. Is it hard to find and keep really good IT employees in the federal government?
From my perspective, yes. In the 30 years that I've been at USDA, there has been quite a bit of turnover. Some of it is, frankly, a salary scale for a person who's managing, say, a $3 billion IT portfolio, or $2 to $3 billion, depending on the year, like Mr. Washington, would make far more than what the senior executive would make in the federal government. So you have some of that, salary pressure. The responsibilities are more, and as you pointed out, and from the private sector to the public sector, the rules and requirements are incredibly difficult to comply with at times. That aren't really even IT related. So I think there's some difficulty in finding qualified people for these positions.
And then keeping them. Do we have private sector type of incentives to keep Mr. Washington made this a good question for you, to keep people like yourself that are good here in the federal government?
I don't know if there are private industry incentives. I would have to know what those incentives are, sir.
I'm just talking about overall general compensation, job satisfaction.
Mr. Washington, this is a good time for you to ask for a raise.
Yes, sir.
And if I could,
that's where I was heading.
I think it would. I do not think we're compensated as well as our private industry counterparts in terms of the amount of responsibility and accountability that we have currently.
Mr. Powner?
We've seen some very qualified people enter the government because they're into mission and it's a patriotic move and that type of thing. But what's really key here, and it gets back to this reporting, who wants to accept a job as a CIO if you're buried down in the agency multiple layers? You want to report to the top and you want to have the right authorities. So I think it's not going to be about with compensation packages. It's going to be about having a position with the right authorities where you report appropriately and you can really help move the country forward.
And we're changing that. Or maybe we've changed that. Is that
We're going to
correct?
talk to,
Because I agree with that.
the CIO at DOD came great private sector experience. We can ask him what attracted him to DOD, because I guarantee he's making a fraction of what he made at JP Morgan. But it would be really good to explore with Mr. Deasy on that topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Blum. Mr. Bice, I just want to make sure I'm clear. By the next FITARA scorecard, we can fix that Manning chart to make sure Mr. Washington's reporting directly to the Secretary?
I know that's a yes or no question, and the answer is yes.
Excellent. Good to hear. Good to hear. Ms. Money, let's start with you, Ms. Money. The organization consolidated 22 CIOs to 1. Did Mr. Washington get all of the budget authority from those other 22 positions?
So the CFO shop is a little bit different in our organization than others. So I have, again, the working capital fund, and then the appropriations and authority and budget formulation for certain offices. From the department standpoint, the program offices actually get their budget formulated within OBPA, which is a different organization. So I really can't answer the question in terms of all the IT budget authority, only those related to the working capital fund. And I can tell you, related to that, the working capital fund, half of that budget is IT type projects.
Gotcha. So that sounded like a no.
Yeah.
Mr. Washington, do you feel like you got greater budget authority now that there is no longer 23 people with the title CIO?
Yes, sir, I feel like I do. I have tremendous transparency into all of the IT spending at Department of Agriculture through the processes that we've set up in the government.
So could, if a element of the USDA was going forward on a project that you thought was going to increase the instability of the network, would you be able to stop it?
Yes, sir, I would.
Okay, that's good. Why, so y'all have implemented Megabyte. You know all the software that's on your system. Was it hard to do it?
No, sir, it was not. We put the proper governance structure in place, the tools in place, and the policies in place to make sure that we complied with FITARA and we had a sustainable process to ensuring that continued.
Is your network just as complicated as most other people's networks?
Yes, sir, it is.
Can you think of any reason why it would be hard to implement the software that counts what software is on your system?
I can't think of any reason, sir, why it would be hard.
Gotcha. Thank you. I'll open this up to all three of y'all. What percentage of the USDA budget is IT spend?
So the USDA has about $140 billion spend with both our mandatory and our discretionary authority, and we have about a $3 billion IT budget, so less than 3%.
Less than 3% of the total USDA budget is on IT spend. Mr. Washington, what are the top 2 or 3 most transformational IT programs? And what I mean by transformational is what has like the game-changing potential for your agency? And I know this is an evaluative question, right? So what do you consider is game-changing?
I believe what is game-changing for the Department of Agriculture is our IT modernization program and our relationship with the Office of American Innovation, because we're approaching this from 5 different areas, and the goal is to provide value to our customers and citizens.
Talk to me about technology, like
technology.
A tool or capability. What is that 2 or 3 things that you really, that is transformational to y'all's operations?
What is transformational to our operations is our ability to consolidate from 17 networks to 4 and use software-defined networks and have a managed service to manage that across the department. We are embarking on robotics and our end-user support in our contact centers and being able to have an enterprise approach to those activities. digitizing our systems and having self-service portals so that we can have an automated approach to services our customers in the field.
Because one of the things I hope that we're able to do with the scorecard is we have to move from just, looking at and collecting basic information to being able to collect information that helps us understand the value that the IT departments are providing to our enterprises, and then ultimately get to a point where we're able to say, what are those opportunities that we're going to be able to provide to our citizens? And I think in your opening remarks and some of your answers to the questions, y'all are thinking in that kind of perspective. In the time I do not have, I was going to ask about legacy code running on USDA. How many lines of each type of code do you have running on your systems? Do you know that number off the top of your head?
No, sir, I don't, but I can get that information to you.
Sure. And the other two questions that would be helpful on that is how many full-time and contract employees does it take to maintain that legacy code? And so those are the two questions. If you can get back to us, we'll make sure we submit that for the record. But would you agree that modernizing your agency's legacy IT includes updating all the legacy code into programming languages in use today?
Yes, sir, I do.
Excellent. And my last question is for you, Ms. Mone. I know y'all have a working capital fund.
Yes,
But it's not an MGT fund.
correct.
Right? And are there plans to create the MGT fund that Mr. Washington has control over?
So we have been in contact with OMB, and they have given us the go-ahead to incorporate. We don't have to create a new working capital fund. We can bring the MGT funds into our existing one. We just have to be able to track it separately, and we have the ability to do that.
Mr. Poundon, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, if you're going to use I think the intent of what you set up, Mr. Chairman, is to create your separate working capital fund. If you're going to use an existing one, you need to be able to compartmentalize it, and this guy needs to be in charge of it. And that's the question with the use. There's 11 agencies, including AG, that said we're going to use an existing working capital fund. But a lot of those agencies also told us we haven't reported as much savings because we're afraid it's going to go away. So you can't say both things. If you're afraid it's going to go away, that means your existing working capital fund isn't working. So that's where there's a cautionary flag going up.
Mr. Mone, your rebuttal?
Yes, I would disagree with that in terms of USDA. As was stated earlier, myself and the CIO have a partnership, a collaborative partnership. He already, as the CIO, sits at the table at our existing governance board for the working capital fund. Once we set up this new fund, we have no issues giving him full authority over that funding, giving him the reports that he needs so he can track the expenses, obligations. So that will not be an issue at USDA.
Mr. Washington, you're going to have some more work to do, but the goal is to make sure you have the authorities you need to do your job. Ms. Kelly has some more questions.
I just wanted to tell Mr. Pounder I left here because I'm on foreign affairs. So Secretary Pompeo said he's at least going to try to raise it to a C. I asked him about their scorecard, so just reporting back. I wanted to talk a little bit about portfolio stat. According to the CIO.gov website, it's described as a tool that agencies can use, and I quote, to assess the current maturity of their IT portfolio management process, make decisions on eliminating duplication, augment current CIO-led capital planning and investment, and maximize the return on IT investments. Mr. Pounder, in other words, portfolio stat exists to save taxpayers' dollars, it sounds like, and make sure they're wisely spent. Is that your
That's correct. I think
assessment?
since the inception of Portfolio Stat, we saved about $2 billion. That's separate from the data center efforts at $4 billion.
And can you explain a little bit more how it helps accomplish that?
Well, what it does is it identifies duplicative systems, and a lot of it's low-hanging fruit, email, HR systems, and the like, especially when you have large federated agencies. You see a lot of similar systems that you can consolidate. You can actually, there's opportunities to go to cloud, as Representative Gianforte mentioned, so there's those opportunities for cost savings.
Thank you. And Mr. Washington, in this area, it shows that you guys received a D. So what are the challenges the department is having that make it difficult for you to improve the score in this area?
Man, I don't think that current score is reflective of the progress we've made or the things that we have in place that allow us to effectively manage our portfolio. We engage with the mission areas and all of the agencies on a daily basis. We have processes in place. We do project reviews as well as investment reviews before they go to our executive review board that's chaired by deputy secretaries. We make enterprise decisions on our investments. I have the ability to halt investments, delay investments, or stop projects. So I would say USDA has made a great deal of progress in this area, and the entire department follows our procedures as they are outlined.
And Mr. Powner, from what you're hearing, do you think the scores will increase next time in this area?
I think if
Or what do you want to see more of?
portfolio stat and data centers were really, if that was going well and we were saving, I think the next step with your MGT score, let's see what gets put in the working capital funds and whether there's a churn where we're reinvesting that money in modernization priorities. So the numbers will show that once the working capital funds get populated.
Thank you. Portfolio stat is a vital element of FITARA, helping to ensure that agencies have visibility into wasteful spending and creating a more efficient IT investment process. It's the kind of clearly bipartisan program that the government needs. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And my last question, Mr. Washington. Last year's FSMA report, it found that USDA does not have a complete organization-wide risk management strategy in place. What steps are you taking to sort this out?
So we've just completed our 5-year cybersecurity plan. We have a risk management board that we've set up. We work very closely with our IG counterparts to ensure that we're not accepting any additional risk, and we reduce the amount of risk that we have currently in our cybersecurity posture. And we're also aggressively attacking our cybersecurity vulnerabilities. We're complying with FSMA and doing a better job of working with our counterparts in the IG.
Mr. Powner, any opinions?
Yeah, Mr. Washington and I talked about this too. I think you'll see, you want to see those IG scores go up. I mean, they're an average of 2 out of 5. And then also, too, the self-reported cap goal metrics, I think they report meeting 5 of the 10. So you probably want to see that going up over time.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. We made some breaking news today. The CIO is going to report to the agency head. Mr. Washington's going to get an MGT fund that he has control over. So, and that megabyte isn't hard to do. So those are some of my takeaways. I appreciate y'all being here today, and I think we're going to go into a temporary recess in order to have our next panel. Thank you all for the witnesses being here today, and this part is adjourned until we come into the session again.